They called it a phase. Then they called it stubbornness. Then they stopped calling it all. And the strangest part, you built something real, something that took courage, sacrifice, years of your life. And yet when you sit at that dinner table, surrounded by the people who are supposed to know you best, you feel like a stranger wearing your own face. This isn't a story about difficult families. It's a story about what happens when you outgrow a world that never knew you were growing. There was a version of you that tried. You know the one. The child who memorized what earned approval, who learned early which parts of themselves were welcome at the table and which ones needed to be folded quietly away. You watched how the family worked its unspoken rules, its invisible loyalties, its particular way of seeing the world, and you tried, genuinely tried, to belong inside it. But there was always something, a feeling that arrived before you had words for it, like wearing a shoe on the wrong foot, not painful enough to scream about but never quite right either. You'd say something at dinner and the table would go slightly quiet. You'd ask a question nobody had asked before. You'd want something different, dream something different, and the air in the room would shift in that subtle, suffocating way. The black sheep isn't born difficult. They're born different. And in families where difference is a threat rather than a gift, that distinction becomes its own kind of wound. You may have felt this in moments when you'd come home excited about something, an idea, a possibility, a glimpse of the life you sensed was yours, and watched it land in the room like a stone dropped into shallow water. No real depth, just the sound of it hitting something hard and the quiet that followed. That quiet taught you something, not the lesson it meant to teach, but a deeper, more private one. There are parts of me that only survive outside of this. Nobody tells you about the grief of growing. You think expansion would feel like joy, and sometimes it does. But when you begin to stretch beyond the edges of your family's world, there is a particular loneliness that arrives alongside the growth. A loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people who love you, and realizing that love and understanding are not the same thing. The middle years are where the gap becomes undeniable. You start making choices your family doesn't recognize. Maybe it's the career path that doesn't translate to their vocabulary of success. Maybe it's the relationship they can't place neatly, the city you moved to, the values you chose deliberately over the ones you were handed. You aren't rebelling. Rebellion is reactive, loud, desperate for attention. What you're doing is quieter and more threatening than rebellion. You are simply becoming. And becoming, in a family system that depends on sameness, looks like betrayal. There's a particular kind of conversation that happens in these years, the one where they explain your choices back to you incorrectly, confidently, without asking, where they reframe your growth as a problem to be solved, a wound to be worried over, a phase to be waited out. And you sit there, listening to a version of yourself that doesn't exist, nodding carefully, protecting the real version like something fragile you carry in your chest. The gap doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from two completely different maps of what a life is supposed to look like. And no amount of love closes the distance between two people reading different maps. There comes a moment, and if you've lived this, you know exactly what I mean, when the distance becomes impossible to pretend away. It might arrive quietly, a holiday gathering where you sit in your childhood home and feel like a tourist, a phone call where you realize you've been editing yourself for so long that the conversation is entirely performance. Or it might arrive loudly, a confrontation, a silence that stretches too long, a comment that finally names the thing that has always been floating, unnamed, in the air between you. Why can't you just be normal? Or its softer, more painful cousin, we just don't understand you anymore. These words land differently than criticism. They land like a door closing. Because what they reveal is not that you are broken. What they reveal is that understanding was never guaranteed. That family, real family, the biological kind that shares your blood and your holidays and your history, does not automatically share your inner world. Never did. And that realization, when it finally arrives fully, carries a grief that no one prepares you for. This is the grief that doesn't have a funeral. There is no ritual for mourning the family understanding you always believed was coming, the one you kept building toward, the one that would finally arrive when you found the right words, the right moment, the right version of yourself to present. At some point, you have to stop waiting for that arrival, and the stopping is its own kind of loss. You may find yourself asking, what do I do with love that doesn't understand me? That is not a small question. Sit with it. Here is what no one says about the black sheep. Leaving is not the victory, and staying is not the failure. The real decision is something more interior than either of those. It is the decision to stop requiring their understanding as the condition for your becoming. This is perhaps the most difficult psychological work a person can do, because the need for family approval is not weakness, it is ancient. It is written into the nervous system before you ever had language. The child who is unseen by their family does not simply grow up and move on. They carry the ache of that unseeing into every room they enter, every choice they make, every version of success they build, and then quietly wonder, but would they be proud? And so the decision point is not about geography. It's not about cutting people off or burning bridges or dramatic declarations of independence. It is the slow, private, almost invisible work of decoupling your identity from their verdict, of understanding, truly understanding, that a person can love you and still be unable to see you. That love and comprehension are not the same river. The life you're building makes sense to you because you have context they don't have. You've had experiences, asked questions, endured dark nights they weren't present for. Your vision for your own life was forged in a language your family was never taught. That is not their fault, and it is not yours. What you're building is not wrong because it's unfamiliar to them. The unfamiliarity is the point. After the decision, there is still the grief. This part often surprises people. They imagine that once they stop needing the approval, the grief would lift. But grief doesn't work on schedule. It doesn't leave when its reason does. It lingers in the odd moments, the achievement you want to share with someone who can truly receive it, the milestone that calls for witnessing, the ordinary Tuesday when you catch yourself wishing the family phone call could feel like home. You grieve the family you imagined, not the one that exists, but the one you kept believing was possible, the one where your mother would listen without trying to fix it, where your father would see you clearly and say so, where the people who share your name could also share your world. That family was real to you. Grieve it honestly. Because here is the truth on the other side of grief. What you carry forward is not resentment, at least not only. What you carry, if you're willing to look, is a profound capacity for self-authorship, for creating chosen family, for building meaning without permission, for holding your own vision even when every voice in the room tells you to put it down. The black sheep does not escape the wound. They learn to move with it. They learn that being misunderstood by the people who love you is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have, and they survive it, and they keep building anyway. That survival is not small. Do not make it small. There is a kind of strength that only the misunderstood are given access to. Not because suffering is noble. It isn't. Not because being the black sheep is a romantic destiny. It's often just exhausting. But because the person who has built a life without the scaffolding of family approval, who has had to reach inward for permission instead of outward, that person knows something the others don't. They know that identity is not inherited. It is chosen, slowly, painfully, beautifully. The life you're building doesn't need their translation. It doesn't need to be legible in the language of a family system that was designed around different needs, different fears, a different map of what a human life is supposed to be. You are allowed to build something they cannot see. You are allowed to grieve that they cannot see it. And you are allowed to keep building anyway, quietly, faithfully, in the full knowledge that some things are worth constructing even when no one from the original story witnesses the finished thing. Maybe that's the final truth of the black sheep. You were never lost. You were just further ahead on a road they decided not to take.